Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. So we're midway through the book Elizabeth and Margaret, and we'll start with Princess Margaret after her and Peter's breakup. I've really enjoyed this book because it shows how the sisters were as they were growing up, when they became adults, and the strong bond that they had all their lives. So let's see what happens next. So Princess Margaret looked after Princess Anne, and she looked at her artwork, and she was 5 years old at that time, and then Princess Margaret talked over Princess Anne's curriculum with her tutor, and she read picture books to her. Princess Margaret's lady-in-waiting, Lady Jane Rain Lacey, said she was intelligent, but it was never put to any sort of good use. It was thought that was what was expected of her: do good work, marry somebody, and have lots of little princesses. Over the years, Princess Anne and Princess Margaret got close, and she continued to look after Princess Anne's education, and was happy that she was the first princess to be educated outside the palace at Bennington, and it was an all-girls boarding school. Princess Margaret was a voracious reader, and she was teaching herself things. There was incidents between the sisters. Princess Margaret, around 1959, started to act out a little bit. She got angry when the audience at a theater remained seated when she arrived. A few hours later, she didn't want to go to the boring lunch party, so she coughed and said she had a cold. She then went to get her hair done and her dress fitted by Dior. Someone said she wanted to be treated like a princess without taking on the responsibilities. Princess Margaret was protective of the Queen, and when Billy Graham was doing rallies, the Queen was intrigued by him. Princess Margaret and the Queen Mother invited him for coffee at Clarence's house to see if he was suitable to meet the Queen. Princess Margaret could also say thanks to her sister and mother that had the courtiers shaking their heads. In 1957, the Queen was complimented by a governor minister on her evening dress, and Margaret remarked, "Darling, that does show your bosom too much." Another time at a barbecue at Balmoral, Princess Margaret threw a wet dishcloth at Queen Elizabeth's face. Queen Elizabeth took it in stride and ducked and went on cleaning up. At another event, there was flaming crepes Suzettes on the table when a young footman got his foot caught on Princess Margaret's evening dress. The flaming brandy cascaded down her dress. The Queen looked puzzled and then said to the Queen Mother, "Oh, look, Mummy, Margot's on fire." But luckily, the dress and Princess Margaret were okay. On the Queen and Prince Philip's 10th anniversary bash, Princess Margaret didn't attend. She went with friends to watch the musical Bells Are Ringing, and they had dinner at the Savoy. She got back to Buckingham Palace around midnight. The party was nearly over by then. She didn't have an apology, a present, or a card. She joined in on the dancing but left after a half hour. That wasn't the only time she didn't show up with Prince Philip and the Queen. One wonders if it was jealousy. Elizabeth had a family, she was a queen, and she had 2 kids. One time the Prime Minister Macmillan was startled when Princess Margaret, clad in a dressing gown, entered the Queen's sitting room and yelled, "No one would talk to you if you weren't the Queen." And the Queen forgave her sister. She would indulge Princess Margaret. Her mother was the same way with her too. One time Princess Margaret said to the Queen Mother, "Why do you dress in those ridiculous clothes?" The Queen Mother just ignored her. Another time, while visiting the Queen Mother at her Castle May, she said to her, "I can't think of why you have such a horrible place." The Queen Mother said to her, "Well, darling, you needn't come again." And Margaret didn't. At Royal Lodge, the princess switched the TV channel without warning when she didn't enjoy what her mother was watching. When the Queen Mother's friend objected to the behavior, the Queen Mother soothed her and said, "You mustn't worry. I'm quite used to it." The book stated that the Queen and the Queen Mother lived with Princess Margaret's dramatic, somewhat histrionic behavior ever since she was a little girl. She was a performer, and for all her faults, they knew that at heart she was a loving and loyal sister and daughter. They forgave her much, almost anything. We have a comparison of the 2 sisters. One would have thought that Princess Margaret was the with-it sister and progressive, but the Queen, with her children, being a mother, juggling a household and a demanding executive job, fit the mold of the modern woman. Princess Margaret, on the other hand, got home at dawn, got out of bed at 11, and then she would have tea and an orange juice or fruit. If she didn't have any engagement, she would go to lunch and she would get fitted with a Stybel or Dior, or she would sunbathe in a secluded garden. She would spend the evening at the ballet or theater, dining or dancing, and she might invite friends home for supper, serenading the crowd with songs as she played the grand piano. Guests who knew what was in store would give their excuses and leave as soon as possible. People who didn't leave had a long night as the princess entertained her guests on the piano. Her servants were on duty for 18 hours because she didn't like to go to bed. The queen, on the other hand, was predictable. She was even-tempered, decisive, and she didn't have any last-minute change of plans. One thing that they both had was an invisible line that prevented people from getting too close up and personal. If you crossed it, you would get the Windsor glare. Princess Margaret, is said by the wife of a courtier, would go from nice to nasty in seconds. She was the only one who would come up to you at a party and really talk to you, but the next day she'd cut you. Now we come to Princess Margaret meeting Tony. February 20th, 1958, they were to meet and they talked over a dinner party. They didn't really have chemistry, and Princess Margaret thought he was gay. Her instincts were just about correct because later he said that he was bisexual. Princess Margaret agreed to have pictures taken of herself on her 29th birthday, and someone suggested Tony. He was a photographer. Tony was a man of contradictions. He was talented and charming, and he was also impetuous and unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. He had a great zest for life, and they kept their romance under wraps. She got a look at the ordinary world through his eyes, and they would eat shepherd's pie cooked by Tony, drink cheap wine, and even wash dishes in the sink. In early summer 1959, the Queen and the Queen Mother were told about the secret affair. They knew something was up because Princess Margaret was lighter and happier than they'd seen her in a while. And the Queen Mother liked him right away. Margaret received a letter from Peter Townsend saying that he was going to marry a 19-year-old Belgian heiress. The princess was stunned because they had made a pact not to marry anyone. Margaret later went for a walk with Tony and told him about the letter. She later said that she got the letter from Peter that morning and decided to marry Tony that evening. She said it wasn't a coincidence. She said she didn't want to marry at all. She said, "Why did I?" "Because he asked me." Really, though, he was such a nice person in those days. The Queen Mother was delighted with the news. The Queen's relationship was more distant with the couple. When she heard of the engagement, she asked that they announce their engagement after she had given birth to her child. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. So Prince Andrew was born a few weeks later, February the 19th, 1960. February 26th, the announcement was made of the engagement of Tony and Princess Margaret. Margaret made history by being the first daughter of a king in more than 450 years to marry a commoner. Anthony was working at the cutting edge of the swinging London. The royal house of Europe didn't agree with the marriage, thinking that pedigree and rank mattered. They were all turning down the invitations to the wedding. The man and woman on the street approved. The Queen and the Queen Mother liked Tony a lot. They were surprised Margaret had found a man willing to put up with her behavior. Tony, when he heard the national anthem, would stop whatever he was doing and stand to attention. He thought the Queen was the most wonderful woman in the world, and he got along well with Prince Philip, too. The wedding took place at Westminster Abbey on May the 6th, 1960. It was the first to be televised, and 300 million people watched. Margaret chose to wear an unadorned dress. Someone said the Queen was scowling. Anyone who knew her said that when she was deeply moved and tried to control it, she looked like a thundercloud. So she stood on the balcony, Princess Margaret did, to take public bows at Buckingham Palace. After a traditional wedding breakfast, the couple got into an open-top Rolls-Royce. The Queen and the other guests flung rose petals at them. Then they drove to Battle Bridge Pier in the Pool of London, and they boarded the royal yacht Britannia for their honeymoon, and they went to the Caribbean. Tony found the Queen Mother, and Prince Philip friendly, but others weren't. Some of the courtiers thought him pretty lowly and called him Tony Snapshot. He became a mediator, though, between the Queen Mother, and Princess Margaret. Tony learned early that Prince Philip was always right, so it was best to let him win an argument. They both respected each other. The Queen he was a bit in love with. When asked if he was in love with both sisters, he said no. Both sisters were very sexy and attractive, and he thought the Queen was later on, too. The early years of the marriage, Princess Margaret was very happy. She had their first child in 1961, and Queen Elizabeth and her sister spoke most days on the phone and saw each other at the private church at Windsor and for drinks and lunch at the Royal Lodge. Tony was given a title which he declined at first, but he later accepted the honor so that their children wouldn't be commoners. He became the Earl of Snowdon and had the courtesy title Viscount Linley of Nymans, while Margaret became HRH, Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon were Britain's hippest couple. They would race through the streets of London on Snowdon's motorcycle or in his new Mini, and they visited street markets, jazz clubs, and theaters. Tony guided Margaret on her style. He said that she should adopt simpler, skimpier trends to mirror the taste of the time. She wore skirts or dresses much shorter than the other royal women, and she would change her hairstyle frequently. Tony wore velvet jackets, voile shirts, and barrel boy caps. In 1964, she had her fourth child. The sisters were different as always. Princess Margaret had her own home and social circle. Queen Elizabeth focused her attention on her horses and dogs. Her people were of the country set. Animals never broke her trust, let her down, or came to her with difficult problems. An insider said that the queen wasn't a people person. She was a horse person, a dog person, and liked being on her own. The queen was like her father. She was uncomfortable with artist and avant-garde people. She preferred the familiar territory of politics, world affairs, and horses. With all the differences, Prince Margaret was the queen's closest friend, and along with her husband, her most loyal supporter. Margaret said at one time, "I've always tried to take some of the burden off my sister. She can't do it all, you know, and I leap at the opportunity to help." So I'm going to stop the video here. Princess Margaret found love after her split from Peter. One wonders if she was really in love with Tony when she decided to marry him, because she only got Peter's letter that very morning saying he was getting married, and then that evening she was engaged herself. And we got to see how the sisters interacted with each other, as well as the relationship between the Queen Mother and the Princess Margaret. Through all the personality differences and the differences in their lifestyles, the sisters were always there for each other, and that was the neat part to find out. The next video will end the series, but it's been a great ride, and it's been great to learn so much about the both of them. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. I wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.